what you saw, is it science? Is it science on capital?
Yes, I like that to be above.
Oh, you're above. Oh, you're above.
Yeah, that was handed over the reins to me, and then keeps evolving. Yeah. Sorry. Welcome everyone. Thank you for showing up for science tonight. I know it's a beautiful night, and I appreciate you being here. I'm Jen Scott. Along with Bob Herman, we organize Science on Tap. Then we want to thank our partners, Urban Artifact and Radio Artifact. Be sure to follow them on YouTube and Twitch. Tonight our speaker is Bennett Kottler, Director of Restoration Projects for the Mill Creek Alliance. He's going to talk about environmental science, which he claims is the most complicated science. So if you want to debate that, save that till the end. Please welcome Bennett to the stage.
Thank you all for showing up. Tonight I want to do three things. I want to talk about environmental restoration, which is the most complicated of all sciences. You know, when you think about rocket science, you're working in a vacuum. It's not like you're going to hit anything. It's not dirty. It doesn't get wet, which are all the easy parts of environmental restoration, which also is arguably the challenge of this generation, is that we have a lot of environment that is not optimized. We're not getting our best value out of it. It's out of sync with our built environments. And climate change, the climate crisis is only one part of it, right? Environmental restoration will also address the extinction crisis that also is a feature of making sure that our biosphere is operating in a way that's sustainable. On those sour notes, a path for us to understand this is through ecosystem science. Ecosystem is an overused term. A lot of people from business overuse it, and I'd like to bring it back and reintroduce it to us because it's a really powerful way for looking at large environmental systems and putting boundaries on them so we can understand them. And lastly, I work for the Mill Creek Alliance, and I think we've learned a lot about restoring environments over the past 25 years of working to restore the stream, which was the backbone through which Cincinnati's industrial core developed. And it's not a unique story. So at any given time, I'm going to be toggling between larger concepts and very local concepts right here where we live. But at any given time, the issues that we see, they are found through every major city around the world. The Mill Creek Alliance is the latest iteration of the 25-year-old environmental nonprofits that have been hard at work at restoring the Mill Creek. You might have heard of the Mill Creek Watershed Council of Communities or the Mill Creek Restoration Project, Groundwork Cincinnati. Any of those ring a bell to anybody? Well, we're the latest version of that, and we are focused on the Mill Creek watershed and working to make it a natural and community asset, so both for nature and for people. We work in 3 to 4 areas. We work on environmental education. We get kids out into the Mill Creek and its surrounding areas. They work together. They interact with crayfish and macroinvertebrates in streams. They hug trees, and they learn science. We have a water quality monitoring group thanks to a group of over 50 citizen scientists that come out on a monthly basis and collect data from about 70 different locations. Our lab is certified by Ohio EPA for credible data, so we can actually submit it to the state. So it's really high quality data, and we have provided some of the data during the shutdown of Metropolitan Sewer District's sewage treatment plant this past month. How many of you were aware of that? Yeah, but our sewage treatment plant for the city failed, and we're curious to know what the impacts are going to be on the creek. But it just goes to show you how crucial it is that our built systems are optimized and interact with our natural systems. We have an annual state of the Mill Creek, typically in March of 2023, and we present the data and the trends for the Mill Creek. So you should put that on your science bucket list for next year. Actually, our group began with our recreation associates, the Mill Creek Yacht Club. Put that on your Cincinnati bucket list too, of come on out and you can paddle the Mill Creek too. They began with just wanting to clean up rather than going to steering committee meetings and funding meetings and discussing what can be done. They just got their canoes out and they have pulled out literal tons of trash from the Mill Creek. I mean, they'll have they'll have an event where they'll pull out nearly 500 tires at any given time. The work that I do is managing the restoration projects, and I apply for grants to Ohio EPA. Some of the money comes through US EPA, and they're $250,000 to as much as $2 million. That's at the top for these kinds of projects. But we actually get earth-moving equipment into the creek after about a half year of design work by professional engineers. And all of what you're looking at was at the same site up in Reading. That's our executive director, Dave Schmidt, at the top of that bank after the vegetation's been removed. And then you can see that we cut that bank back to a more stable slope. It includes armoring with rock to stabilize the bank during those Mill Creek storms. And then, of course, there's education, where after the fact I need to put a sign up and remind people not to mow down the $250,000 project that I just installed. So to orient you to the Mill Creek watershed, it's 166 square miles, about 100,000 acres, 28 miles across 2 counties. If you're in Liberty Township, you may still be in the Mill Creek watershed. 37 political jurisdictions. So at any given time, it's a political challenge to get the communities to work together, and they have different microcultures about what their perspectives are, and nearly 500,000 residents. You can see our sister watersheds, which include the Great Miami to the west, the Little Miami to the east, and then we have 2 smaller watersheds which empty directly into the Ohio River. And you can see where we're located here in Urban Artifact in the lower portion of the watershed. So these are large systems, and that's what we're interested in restoring, is an entire 100,000 acre system. That system is part of the Ohio River Valley drainage system, which is huge and includes parts of New York. And it is part of the mind-bogglingly large Mississippi River drainage system, which stretches across 2 countries, across nearly 40 different states. And if you were to get in a car and drive, you could drive for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, you would still be in the same ecosystem, the same single system. So the whole discussion of ecosystems is relatively new. And let's see if I jumped from some slides. I think I'll take this one first, is explaining what a watershed is, this whole idea of it being a single system, a single ecosystem. And that's all the land that drains into a single outlet. It's defined by the ridges. So when you get to the high point, you're probably at the edges of that system. And Borman and Likens were interested in the effects of deforestation. Back in 1963, to study deforestation, they could actually deforest a forest. You couldn't get that permitted now. And there it is. That is one of their experimental watershed systems. And you can see the arrows indicating all the water draining down to a common outlet. And at the very bottom of the outlet is a culvert. They could figure out all of the water chemistry by measuring at a single point. They could get a tremendous amount of information just by that limited sampling. And so that shows you the power of looking at environments in terms of their system, in terms of their boundaries. And what they did in their study, which also is ongoing at this time, so it's about a 50-year-old long-term ecological research area, the first in the world to begin looking at environments for that long. They also created a new science of the approach that they use of defining the system, and they created ecosystem science. And it's a very different approach that does not focus on the organisms. You don't have to know the species that are in the system, but what you are looking at is what are they doing, regardless of what species they are. In some ways, I think that this was in conversation, 1963, the start of early computer science, where the idea being that materials go in, you have an input, you have a function that operates on it, and that you have a particular output. For comparison, 1963, you can see what this IT specialist was contending with in a deck of 256 cards. That was CRAM, card random access memory. So computer science was at its start, but I still think this idea of looking at the functions of these systems probably were in conversation with each other. And now we're really well versed in this. So when you look at these images, when you look at the top left image, we're not thinking of it in terms of, oh, well, that's an eastern bumblebee on a marigold. What we're looking at it is, oh, that's pollination, right? We don't have to know the noun, who is doing it. We just need to know the function. So we're familiar with that, but other functions include safe drinking water, all the lumber that is produced, which shocks me to this day that buildings are still being framed with wood. It includes recreation as being a service that we get from healthy environments. And that is nationally ranked paddler Bernie, who's with our yacht club on the Mill Creek. So you can have an experience like that here in Cincinnati rather than having to take a trip out to Idaho to go out to a river to have an experience like that, right? So it's incredibly valuable. I was in Hawaii and amazed to see the industry of weddings where brides from two continents are flying out to Hawaii because it's so beautiful. There's so much value to that environment, and the brides are lining up one after the other in the same location on the beach to get their photos and their memories of a lifetime. And that's to say nothing of all of our major religions have drawn metaphor and meaning from nature. It's included and gives power to some of our most deep cultural and spiritual aspects. It includes services like this. On top is a pollution event in Beijing, and on the bottom is the flood of 2018 here in Cincinnati. Imagine if you had to put together the contract to get all of that water removed. Right? Unimaginable scale of materials and amount of effort that's needed to maintain these systems. Well, a group of environmental economists did just that. They tried to figure out the value of 17 ecosystem services, as I was indicating in that previous slide, across 16 different biomes, being temperate forest, tropical forest, tundra, prairie, coastal systems. And they totaled it up. In 1997, they repeated it in 2014, and they came up with a value of these ecosystem services and functions of being from $25 to $145 trillion, being from about 33% to 2 times the global GDP, being on order of the entire GDP of the United States, of these externalized values that nature has. So in some ways, you might think of there as being an entire second globe, a second set of infrastructure running behind our human-built system, as being foundational so that we can operate in our human economy. We need another natural economy operating behind the scenes, providing us materials and services that are of value. I scaled that down to the Mill Creek watershed system, and in the Mill Creek watershed, we have about a $20 billion economy over 37 communities in our counties, and so that is on order of billions of dollars of natural services that we use when our communities don't flood, when we have natural spaces to go out to, and when we're enjoying nature around us. In '97, a group of scientists looked at this, and they phrased it differently, stating that the reason that we should care about all of this value and alterations to these ecosystems is because human beings dominate this system. It's not as though nature is going to reassert an independent system. It's that we're transforming a third to a half of the land surface. We're using more than half of all fresh water. In terms of the atmosphere, we've altered its composition. People have been focusing on greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide. That's to say nothing of the nitrogen, which we fix from the atmosphere into chemical forms, liquid or solid, to be used in industrial processes. Many of them are used to manufacture chemicals, including fertilizers, which we then may apply to land, which then can run off into our water systems and can pollute it. So we are a global force. And an example or a case study in that kind of effort is to look at the history of the Mill Creek. And again, these sorts of changes you might find in other systems as well. I'm beginning a little bit further back than I usually like to go, but I thought it would be interesting for us to consider that 2 million years ago, our land didn't look the way it does now. There was no Ohio River as we know it now. The Licking River in Kentucky, rather than emptying into the Ohio River, it flowed north through the Mill Creek Valley. And there was an ancient Taze River which followed much of the course of the Ohio River but flowing further north. So yes, we were in an ancient river valley that no longer existed. But what I typically like to do to start out the history of the Mill Creek is consider 1787, essentially the time that Cincinnati was founded. At that time, Robert Cleve Sims renamed the name that was given to that body of water from Makatewa to Mill Creek. There were no mills on the creek. And what's the difference between a creek and a river? Well, a creek is smaller, but there wasn't any particular reason or any particular basis that was considered. So with that, we now change the whole trajectory of this body of water. Rather than it being whatever the meaning was of Makatewa and the associations with it, and we believe that it referred to the black place. Maybe that referred to the soil. Maybe that referred to what it was like being underneath its trees. Or perhaps it had some deeper spiritual meaning. But we have lost that meaning with the change in the language and the change in the word. And now what we're left with is a river is a system which is now a place for industrialization and exploitation. And that's what we did. So the first slaughterhouses were operating in the 1830s. The combined sewers were installed shortly after that. There were factories, and it isn't so much and solely a concern about whatever pollution might have been going into a creek at that time, but there was industrial scale extraction of water from the Mill Creek system. And I'll show you some of that. And trees were literally decimated. Some 1/10 of the trees that were found here at the time of European settlement were left by the end of the 19th century. And I show these images of the Carolina parakeet and the black bear that used to be in the Mill Creek Valley. And it was a rich place at the time of European settlement. In 1913, there were 3 large distillers operating on the Mill Creek. Just down the road from us in Northside was one of the larger ones. Clifton Springs Distilling Company removed 1.7 million gallons of water per day from that system. So again, how can the system function with that level of industrial extraction and use of water? Union Distilling Company was located in Carthage, and down at the mouth of the Mill Creek was Mill Creek Distilling Company, which used groundwater, but nonetheless, they were dumping untreated waste into the Mill Creek at that time. So in addition to extraction of water, there has always been a concern about overflow of water or too much water. And noteworthy floods include the flood of 1913 and the flood of 1937. But keep in mind, there were also the floods of 1884, 1907, 1943, 1964, 1974, 1997. So flooding and our development has always had a tenuous relationship with water. If any of you go down to St. Rose Church on Riverside Drive, you can see the marker that they have displaying the height that each of these flood events cause. And yes, 37, it looks like 84 and 1913 were among the highest ones. So following those floodings and to address that flooding concern, we put in the barrier dam. It began operating at 65 feet high, and then yes, we've had floods that have exceeded that. And then in the 80s, as late into the 90s, the project of channelizing the Mill Creek continued. And to me, the idea of encasing a creek in concrete, it is like encasing Anakin Skywalker in metal, and you just lose the soul and many other functions of the creek. And I understand that there's a priority of protecting the city from flooding, but perhaps there could have been a better balance. If we go back to this idea of the services and functions that are being provided by a creek and the land around it, we see some 17 different functions and services. How many of those are still remaining once you encase a stream bank in concrete? Well, to my eye, yes, you do have the storm regulation, water regulation, erosion control, but you lose everything else. You lose the cultural value, you lose the genetic resources, you lose the habitat, the pollinators aren't there. And so if I were to give that a grade, with only 4 out of approximately 16, 17, yeah, it would be a failing grade for that ecosystem to maintain its function. So the challenge before us is, can we keep our ecosystems functioning at as high a level as we can while still maintaining a service that's crucial to our built environment, to our human-dominated world? And then probably the low point for the Mill Creek was in 1997 when American Rivers called it one of the most endangered rivers in America. And this was a cartoon in nationally syndicated paper. And incidentally, this year, the Ohio River has made that list, highlighting, after all these many years, we still need to improve our management and how we have this intersection of our natural and built infrastructure. All that being said, there has been an incredible recovery in the Mill Creek. We have nesting bald eagles in the Mill Creek, along the Mill Creek watershed. We have a friend who's a fisherman, and he sends us photos of the latest fish that he's caught, and he's actually documenting a really great diversity of fish. that are found in the Mill Creek, which again, it's connected to the Ohio River. As long as there are no dams blocking their way, and that's one of our projects is to have a free-flowing Mill Creek, whatever's in the Ohio River can wander up into the Mill Creek, assuming that it's suitable habitat and assuming that our environment's connected. We have reintroduced freshwater mussels that were extirpated, that went extinct sometime in the 19th century. So they're among the more sensitive creatures. Actually, their life cycle depends on being able to form a symbiotic relationship with fish. They latch on to their gills, the fish carry them around to a new habitat, and when they get too large, then the babies, the new larval form, drop off. So you need the fish to come first before you get the mussels. So we are experimenting with reintroducing mussels, and needless to say, mussels are filter feeders, so there's going to be this positive feedback loop of environmental improvement. And lastly, I suppose the most important thing is that people are coming back. So we are paddling the Mill Creek, and we're encouraging people to get into the Mill Creek. Do any of you have any questions or comments at this point before I start pivoting into some scientific concepts that I'd like to keep in mind before I show you one aspect of restoration that we do?
Diversity of the fish that he was catching? What kind of fish?
Right. What kind of fish are being caught? Well, we have carp that are invasive. We have a variety of bass. We have some hybrid forms of bass. We have trout that we're finding. There are stripers. I believe that we're also there might be alewife, and we're finding sunfish, variety of species. Some are more sensitive, some are slow swimmers, others are stronger swimmers. So, yeah, there probably are about 27 to 30, more than 30 species of fish that are making their way. Various suckers, catfish. There's a lot of good fishing around. And if you need fishing spots, we may be able to help you out.
Does the lab do any eDNA on the water that's collected in various places to get the full breadth?
Do we do any eDNA studies when we have our citizen scientists go out and do water quality sampling and studies? We don't. We just monitor 7 water quality parameters like nitrate, phosphate. We do redox, which is an indication of salt, and it also includes optical whiteners, which is a marker for sewage being released because it comes from detergents. So if the detergents are in a water sample in the creek, then it must have gotten out through a sewer leak. And then we do coliform studies for sewage.
What's that last one?
E. coli.
Oh,
What's the last one that I mentioned?
yeah. I didn't
Yeah,
understand E. coli.
yeah, bacterial studies that show whether there's sewage in the water.
And so what kind of results are you getting? Are they consistent, or does it vary to different parts of the watershed? What are you finding?
Right. What are our findings? What kind of results during this water quality sampling? It varies considerably. Most days, the stream is good for recreation, and it can be fished. It's still not swimmable. We find after rain events There are combined sewer overflows, and so contact with water should be avoided for about 48 hours. We're finding impacts from the Upper Mill Creek water treatment facility, the reclamation facility, which is located in Butler County. We find impacts from that. One of the parameters we sample is chlorine, and we can see a marker of elevated chlorine levels, elevated redox levels as well. So yes, there are some point sources that are of concern. Occasionally, our volunteers will find a sewer break at some anomalously high level, but we're finding nitrogen and phosphorus levels have decreased over the years, and often in compliance.
Do you think that's because farming has somewhat subsided from the area, or as far as nitrogen, I mean?
So what is the cause of that? Is the decline in farming a possible explanation? Possibly, but at the same time, I think that the treatment plants are doing a better job. Their permits have gotten more stringent, but at the same time, we're also finding that although the treatment facility can be within its permit, it may not be at the appropriate level for ecological benefit. If you come to our State of the Mill Creek in next March, we'll have about an hour-long discussion of the results of this sampling at all of our sites. So that would be a good hour of your time. So I'm going to roll on and introduce just a few concepts to help us think about restoration. The first one is we can think of there being 4 phases of the environment, and at any given time there are chemicals being transferred between them. So what's taking place in earth may get into water, which may volatilize into air, and it can get into organisms. So chemicals are being transferred as well as energy being transferred among the 4 phases of the environment. Second thing to keep in mind is that space and time are important to consider when it comes to restoration of the environment. You can see on the x-axis there are years, and it's in a log scale. So this came from a handbook of engineering that's used, about 16 volumes, to help practitioners in environmental restoration. And if you begin on the lower left side, you can see that in-stream improvements can be placed, and you might see that over the course of a few years. But as you go across, decreasing erosion from sedimentation and increasing the wood, and ultimately getting to the fish that everybody wants to see, that may be, according to this source, that can be centuries. That's going to take a long time. The fact that we've been at it for 25 years and our friend Sean can fish and see as much fish diversity as he does, I feel like that means we're ahead of the game. But nonetheless, there's a whole assemblage of native fish that we may never get to within our lifetimes. Lastly, is also to consider on the y-axis is size. Size of the project makes a difference. So we typically work at the park level size of an acre or 2 or 5, or if we're lucky, 10. And the benefits that we see may be limited compared to projects that are on the watershed size scale, or if there were industry-wide standards throughout the entire Mississippi River Basin, we would see much larger scale improvements, which ultimately would restore flow throughout the entire system. The other thing to keep in mind, as I kind of suggested, everybody wants to see the biological improvements, but if you imagine a hierarchy of improvements, the biology is the last thing that you get to after improving the chemistry, after improving the geology. And I guess this figure was put together by hydrologists who argue that if you get the hydrology and the flow of a river correct, everything else fits into place. So I want to take a little bit of time thinking about the structure of a stream, because that'll be a way for us to think about what a stream should look like, and how we break it, and how potentially needs to be fixed. So a stream corridor has a channel through which the water itself flows, and there's a stream bank which holds it in place, but then there's this rich, diverse, transitional riparian zone of vegetation which takes advantage of the changeable water regime, high water flow, and at the same time of being on the land. But again, it's a really changeable and dynamic biological area. And then there's an upland area. The floodplain of a stream can extend for miles. And so it's important that we plan accordingly. So when it comes to degradation of a stream, US EPA identifies 4 sources of degradation. The sediment, the habitat, the stream itself, or nutrients might contribute to the degradation of a stream. So in this case, this is up in Twin Creek in Sharonville. It had originally been called Confluence Park because it's at the confluence of East Fork, the Mill Creek main stem, and in this you can see Beaver Run coming into the Mill Creek main stem, and you can clearly see the difference in water quality. And so again, even though there's this notion that, well, all environment's connected, there's a period of time when you can see distinctions between different environments. So what you saw looked like sediment-laden water, and that sediment can come from erosion of stream banks, and you might also see trees being undercut as sediment loss happens. And along with that, each of these causes of degradation, they're connected. So not only do you have sediment that can get into the water and be an impairment, but then you can also see that it impairs the habitat. So going back to this image, what are the impacts of having that much sediment being in water? Well, it changes everything. It changes the light that's transmitted through the water. It changes the chemistry. What chemicals, there are different chemicals that are sorbed to those sediment particles. The stream bed becomes embedded with sediment instead of being gravelly, a nice hiding place that's oxygen rich for particular species. So the ecology changes, your water treatment costs go up. The system gets entirely changed. The causes of that, again, can be an eroding stream bank, and this is a photo of a project that I worked on in Evendale, and you can see this eroding stream bank where anytime you see vertical stream banks, you see vegetation, that's undercut. You see the leaning trees. That indicates that there's an erosion problem. And in fact, this erosion was not isolated to just that small segment that I showed you. I estimate that it was about 100 yards long. And then if you can imagine a cubic yard, which is a yard wide by a yard high, by a yard deep. So this is changing year after year. The bank is being cut back so that 100 cubic yards eroding each year is the weight of 100 tons of sediment, the weight of about 50 cars, each year getting into a stream. So again, this degradation that can happen based on water use, based on climate change, exceeding the design capacity of a natural system, development, which puts too much water into a system and adds a whole variety of stress and shear forces to it, are where the degradation comes from. So my job, and I put it to you, our job, is to restore this. So how do we do this? Well, we go back to these different components of a stream, and we can do work at any one of these areas and have improvement. The area of most concern is the stream bank, and you can see on the left side what a stream looks like when it's eroded before a project is done, and then you can see afterwards there's a gradual slope and there's vegetation, and so that's our goal for this. So what we'll do is we'll excavate and recontour the stream with earth-moving equipment. This is a project in Carthage at the former Hartwell Golf Course, where we did exactly that. The vegetation's been removed and the bank has been excavated and cut back. We typically aim for angles of 3-to-1, maybe 4-to-1. So for every 1 foot in height, the stream bank is angled back 3 feet or 4 feet. If we have limitations and we can only go to a 2-to-1 slope, then you need additional armoring of that bank to add stability. And it's literally putting in rock at the toe of the bank. If you can imagine the bank being a foot, so it could be rock toe, it could be wood toe. And the presence of wood in a stream is crucial because it adds to that stability. So this is it begins to indicate the importance of biology to the stability of the geology. This is in Sharonville. This is a small stream, but you can see what that armoring looks like. A less energetic stream, you get to use smaller rock. In a more energetic stream, you need to use boulders that are about 2 feet big so that they're not mobilized in storms. At various times, sometimes people dump rock into streams, and if they're flat plains, then they get mobilized. They become surfboards despite weighing more than 100 pounds. They'll be moved by that water, again, which has got tons, can weigh tons. So this last part that I started indicating is planting and bioengineering has value. In that very same project that I showed you at Hartwell Golf Course, within about 6 months, vegetation was added. Sometimes there are these notions of, wow, if we can only find a solar-powered, organic system that's responsive and smart, that would be the ideal engineering that we could do. Well, that sounds like a description of how plants grow. So keeping plants and using them as part of the system seems sensible. We always focus on native plants. They deliver more services to the ecosystem. This is an academic at Indiana University, Dr. Glover, who has figured out how to remove the dirt around the roots of plants. And what you see with native plants is they typically go down feet into the soil, as opposed to Kentucky bluegrass, which goes down inches into soil. So in addition to whatever plants are doing to improve the biology, selecting native plants are a good choice to improve the stability of soil itself. And that's one of the things that we do in the dormant season, where in association with Hamilton County Soil and Water District, we have been installing live stakes in stream banks. We go out and collect dormant willow branches. There are a number of plants that do this, maple and buttonbush, dogwood as well. You can just take cuttings of their branches, and then while they're dormant, you put them in the stream, and then when the warm weather comes, they wake up and they help stabilize the stream. So that's live staking. If putting in a tree is the best thing that you can do for an environment, the best tree that you can put into the environment is an oak. Oaks, they're among our most diverse trees. You can see in this figure on the left side, the number of oak species is much more numerous than you find of cherries, willows, and maples. The figure on the bottom shows the number of larva species that they host, the number of caterpillars that they host. Again, if the plants are diverse, then the insects that feed on them are likely diverse. So they host many more different kinds of insects, and that diversity implies stability to a changing environment, and that feeds the entire ecosystem. Those insects are eaten by birds, in particular baby birds. That's their protein, right? Birds' seed is all well and good, but fat caterpillars are what baby birds really need. So, oaks, they're diverse. They're the primary producers, feeding the entire system. Their leaves and acorns, again, are eaten by diverse organisms. They'll be eaten by turkeys. They'll be eaten by mammals. They're large, so generations of mammals can live in oak trees. And of course, there's the water and carbon dioxide management. Mature trees can evapotranspirate hundreds of gallons of water per day. So if you're concerned about water management, trees are going to be an important tool to use. And again, habitat and the raw materials. So they really check off a lot of boxes that other technical approaches, technical engineering approaches, really have trouble competing with. So, having joined me for this talk, though, I'd also put it to you that environmental restoration and thinking and drinking, about the environment shouldn't stop here. there are always opportunities to get involved. Typically every first Saturday, I try to have a work party in the watershed. We go out to different areas and we remove honeysuckle and plant. And it depends, changes with the season, but it's always something interesting going on. Second Saturdays are our water quality monitoring in the field and in the lab. And they always need additional people to assist with that. Third and fourth Saturdays, our yacht club gets out into the stream. And you too can paddle in the Mill Creek. We have a great event coming up this September, as we do every year, which is Run the Ripples at Solway Park. Come down, we have a variety of things going on. We'll have paddling, we'll have a walk and talk looking at a restoration project that we installed and collecting critters from the creek. And then in October is our Upper Mill Creek cleanup. So again, lots to do, and this little GIF I put together was from a few hours of work. Some UC students freed this sycamore tree from honeysuckle. And yeah, it really does make a difference, and it builds one on the other for later improvements, including plantings and just being able to enjoy trees that we have. So I appreciate the opportunity, and by all means, be in touch. Thanks so much. Any other questions? Anything else that you have in mind? Bob?
All right. Dormant willow, where can you source that?
Where do you find the dormant willows that we saw people hammering into a stream bank? You find it from other willows. We have, it's usually two parts. We have a harvest weekend or harvest day followed up by an installation day. The Great Miami River has this incredible sandbar, and the Yacht Club and Rivers Unlimited usually provide canoe services, and in March we get bundled up. We paddle out to this gravel bar as long as levels are low enough. We cut them, we trim them, we prepare them, turn them into steaks, and provide them to people to be used. And Hamilton County has been coordinating that event. We have a lot of different people participating. At Cardinal Land Conservancy did that as well. But if you find willows, let us know.
Are there any public trails at the Ohio end of Wood Creek that you can walk?
Yeah, and you asked, are there any trails that you can walk? There are segments all over. One of our projects is to connect them all, with an idea of connecting to the Ohio River. The Mill Creek empties into the Ohio River, and it would be great to use some of the abandoned rail lines and repurpose them. We would connect the communities. There's a really great trail here in Northside that goes from across Spring Grove Cemetery in Solway Park down to the Yellow Bridge in Camp Washington. But that's about a 1.5 mile segment. There's a segment around Caldwell Nature Center. And one of the projects that I'm starting is in Evendale to connect the Mill Creek to Sharon Woods Park. But that's gonna take some time. I'm doing the restoration now. I ought to put it out for bid, which will 6 to 9 months to design, construct, and then the trail has to be put in. But yeah, there definitely are all kinds of walking trails, and I would really encourage you to get out to the parks and explore them, connected to the Mill Creek, even if it's not as extended a trail. And one of our issues is just in terms of development, is that private property has fragmented what ought to be a continuous riparian streamside corridor, which would also provide some protection from flooding if it was all connected and was not developed. But yeah, by all means, check out our website. We might have some maps too that might be of help.
Remember in your talk, you're saying you were shocked that wood is being used for framing buildings. I guess my question is it, do you think it's good or bad that we're using wood to build buildings? I think it's good because it's a renewable resource, and I think it reduces global warming. So what's...
Yeah. The question is, I stated when looking at the image of wood being used to frame buildings that I was surprised. I think what my surprise was is that it's the 21st century and we're still relying on trees being grown. And I don't know, just I mean it seems like it's an age-old technique that we've been doing this for thousands of years, relying on trees for our shelter, and we're still doing it now, regardless of how modern the design looks. But absolutely, I mean, your point's well taken. Of well, maybe that's the green future that we should have, is we should continue to grow the materials that we use in our shelters and for other purposes.
All right. And one thing, I guess you're familiar with urban forestry or urban lumber.
Yeah.
That's where you use trees grown in urban areas for wood products. Well, there's a lot of trees are trimmed or cut down in urban areas for various reasons, and I think a lot of it's used to make mulch, or maybe some is burned as firewood. But do you think more emphasis should be put on using it into lumber? Maybe trees from Mill Creek trees that die could be used for lumber.
Yeah, I mean, I think among your points was that we have an urban forest, and we could be tapping into that and using that. And if you haven't seen the beautiful, really flat out beautiful backgammon board that he made out of salvaged trees.
Yeah, it was from my backyard, in fact.
Like, there's nothing more sustainable than that. And yeah, I think there would be a lot of value for city folks to see the forest for the trees for the forest, and yes, and have that ownership and use it as a resource, and maybe be more selective about the trees that we have around us, and realize too that our choices in our landscape, whether it's at our home or again the larger scale of our school, our church, our city, larger scale, can really have benefits. So instead of being concerned about lack of food, we can plant fruit-bearing trees. The Common Orchard Project here in Cincinnati is a great group that's doing that, installing orchards throughout the city to have edible forests and to have a source of food for anyone to use in our public space, right? Well, how about that as a planning consideration of our vegetation can be used for that, and I definitely think in various ways one of the issues with our environmental resources is getting users to take advantage of it and ultimately maintain and be good stewards.
In fact, many cases, like if you have to cut down a tree in a city park, because it's dying, or someone's if someone at their home has to do some tree cutting, tree trimming, that could be used for lumber. Okay,
Yes, but suggesting the trees could be used for more uses. They could be used for art projects.
yeah, right.
Any other questions? Any other thoughts?
Well, I'll comment on that for a moment. Like honey locust trees have always been used for fence posts, okay, hundreds of years. We built a post and beam home, okay, timber paved home, using eastern white pine. So that was a way. And now, in Scandinavia, they are building multi-story buildings using wood construction, renewable wood, instead of using other products, So, using natural products is actually maybe a partially a green solution, actually. We're not talking about clear cutting stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the comment is, again, the many uses of trees can be a green solution. It's being done in Scandinavia, and it can be done here. I mean, wouldn't that be interesting? You've got 100,000 acre watershed, additional watersheds nearby. We would save the fossil fuels of transportation from long distances. So, yeah, accounting for additional land use and use of renewable materials could be part of a green solution. Do we have time? Do we have time for anything else?
Quick question?
So what's the future of the ash tree in Mill Creek or elsewhere? Are there many ash trees in the Mill Creek Valley? What's the future of them?
Yeah, the question is, are there many ash trees in the Mill Creek Valley? Well, unfortunately, there are fewer and fewer, and in particular, very few reproducing ash trees because of the emerald ash borer, an invasive insect. So, although there may be saplings, they're not growing to maturity. So our forests are changing, and we're losing elements from them. I'll also add there are things like the tree of heaven, which is also called stinking sumac. If you ever see a tree that looks like a walnut with compound leaves, and you break off a leaf and it smells like burnt peanut butter, that's the tree of heaven, or stinking sumac. And it's a host for the spotted lanternfly, which is a new invasive species spreading across the United States. So the invasive plant supports the invasive species, which will eat some of our native plants, and the system's not in balance. So that's why we're always interested in working with native plants. On our roads, those beautiful white calorie pear trees that you see, are a tree that has become invasive. So we have such beautiful North American trees. We have great selection that would serve the same purpose, but again, support our ecosystems and be better in balance, and we wouldn't have the costs of battling invasive vegetation and animals.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to our partner Radio Artifact. Be sure to follow them on YouTube, where you can see all of their programming, including previous Science on Tap presentations. Thank you all for being here. Follow us on Facebook at Science on Tap Cincinnati, and we hope to see you all next month on Wednesday, June 7th, where our own Bob Herman is going to talk about the wildlife in Tanzania. Everybody have a safe drive home.
You